Good evening and welcome to New Wineskin's 2023 Spring Webinar Series. My name is Dr. Matt Farlow and I'm the Community Catalyst Engagement Specialist for New Wineskins. And I wanted to just take this moment to introduce you to new-wineskins.org, our website for New Wineskins. New Wineskins exists for those of you who might be new to New Wine, exists to mobilize local churches and other Christian organizations to share effectively the good news of the Father, Son, and Spirit's just love and peace, foster meaningful dialogue with diverse communities, and identify and serve marginalized populations against the backdrop of increasing cultural divisions. And this is about building relational bridges through Jesus and contemporary culture for New Wineskins. And we do this, if you look up here on our website, you just go right here again, new-wineskins.org. And what we do is we seek to build relationships through education, through consultation and transformation. And you ask education or consulting or transformation, what areas of engagement? If you scroll right on down there, we have 7 different areas of engagement right here: faith and science, church and public square, religious pluralism, and the like. So that's information. And then if you wondered if there's other events and seminars that New Wine might be going and participating in or putting forth, right up at the top of the page right here, the events page. And so if you're in the webinar and you registered, then you know about the events tab. If you have friends who want to come, even for tonight, you would just point them to new-wineskins.org. Right here at the top of the page, the events tab. You have them click right there and scroll right on down, and you see for tonight, Maximize, Don't Marginalize, week 6. And this is the session that we're having tonight. But if this session was the only one that you registered for, and you're like, wow, this is a great opportunity of this conference series, because you scroll down here on the main page of the conference series, here are the 6 series that we have partaken in, including tonight. And you can have full access, unlimited access to this if you actually register for the whole series. And you can do that tonight as well at this registration link. And then though, before you leave our page, go right on up here to the sign up for the newsletter. And once you click that, boom, sign up to receive news and updates about New Wineskins via our newsletter. And this way, once you subscribe here, then guess what? All these events that come up and things that we participate in, as well as our newsletter, you will be informed with that, because now you're subscribed to the ongoings of New Wine. And so now, without any further ado, I'd like to introduce New Wine Director, Dr. Paul Lewis-Metzger, who is the moderator for this evening. And
thanks so much, Dr. Farlow. Really appreciate all you're doing to make this event possible, and also Lynette Boyer and Jezreel Kolhoff for all that they've done as well. Thanks for joining us for this event tonight, which is LGBTQ+ youth, fostering care close to home. And I'll share the summary for this event tonight and then introduce our panelists. It is important that people of all walks of life come together to end homelessness and suicide among LGBTQ+ youth. Stories persist of Christian parents forcing their children who come out to move out, often leading to life on the streets. Homelessness makes them vulnerable to various forms of abuse, as well as the threat of suicide. Those in foster care face similar pressures and challenges. This session will bring together those of affirming and non-affirming theological positions to care for the hurting, in this case, gay youth. The common denominator of human dignity and decency must take precedence, as in the case of the Samaritan in Jesus' account of neighbor love in Luke 10. The Samaritan cares for the person beaten and left for dead. The Samaritan knows nothing of the other man's beliefs or lifestyle, simply that he is in need and addresses it. The same must also be true today. May we care for and love our neighbors, our LGBTQ+ youth and neighbors, other neighbors as ourselves. So without further ado, I'll introduce in alphabetical order our panelists. And as I introduce them, if they could come on the screen, please. Dr. Brad Harper is Professor of Theology and Church History at Multnomah University in Portland, Oregon. He is the Associate Director of the Institute for Cultural Engagement, New Wine, New Wineskins, and a member of the editorial board for New Wine's journal, Cultural Encounters, a journal for the theology of culture. He holds a BA from Biola University, an MDiv from Talbot School of Theology, and a PhD from St. Louis University. Dr. Harper has published numerous articles and books on Christianity and its engagement with culture, and speaks regularly on the issues of gender and sexuality. Dr. Harper's publications include Exploring Ecclesiology, an evangelical and ecumenical introduction, which we co-authored together, Space at the Table, Conversations Between an Evangelical Theologian and His Gay Son, co-authored with Drew Harper, the next panelist I will introduce. And then also The Kingdom of God in George Eldon Ladd as a theological foundation for the role of the church in society in God and Caesar, Camp Hill. Evangelicals and Catholics Together, A Chance to Talk in the Ministerial Forum of the Evangelical Free Church, and Larry Norman, Literature and Listening to God, and Listening for God in Pop Culture, a response to Stanley Gren's Pop Culture, Playground of the Spirit, or Diabolical Device. For Cultural Encounters, a journal for the theology of culture. Brad, as always, it's great to partner with you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Drew Harper is a writer and researcher born in Los Angeles. His work, and you're coming to us live tonight from Los Angeles. Am I wrong? No, you're not in Los Angeles right now.
I am in Los Angeles. I wasn't born in Los Angeles.
Okay.
I'm living in Los Angeles. Born in St. Louis.
Got it. I'm sorry. Based in Los Angeles. I'm sorry.
In Los Angeles.
Yeah,
Very
I
based.
said born, and I thought it was St. Louis. Okay, thanks for correcting me. Okay, his work on the confluence of religion and American culture has been published in HuffPost, Vice, Mike.com, and Gay Letter magazine. His book, Space at the Table, co-written with his father, Brad, was a Powell's bestseller. He is currently co-creating a multimedia documentary project about spirituality at the unseen edges of America, along with his partner, Cricket, a once successful NYC personal injury trial attorney who went rogue to do immigration law in ICE camps and anarchist communes. That's fascinating. So Drew has been drug addicted, gay, and homeless on America's streets, and is passionate about contributing to conversations around queer youth wellness, autonomy, and spiritual interdependence. For that multifaceted bio, Drew, the only thing I got wrong was where you were born, I think. So
that's right. Yeah.
But so good to have you. Always good to see you.
See you.
Our next panelist is Terea Miller, who is the Director of Training and Consulting at GSBA. Terea, could you tell us GSBA, what that stands for, please? Because our viewers won't know, and I just have GSBA.
Yes, we actually go by the initials now. It originally stood for Greater Seattle Business Association, but because we're nationwide, we just keep it to the GSBA.
Got it. Thank you. She enjoys working with small businesses, particularly BIPOC-owned, women-owned, and marginalized communities and grant assistance, financial acumen, such as cash flow analysis and loan documentation prep. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is at the core of every one of Terea's accomplishments. Her previous 25 years in banking included 7 years of managing an audit department for a local community bank in Snohomish County. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but Snohomish County. Additionally, she was appointed by Washington Governor Jay Inslee in November 2015, approved by the Senate, and is now serving her second term as chair of the Board of Trustees for Everett Community College. Terea, so good to have you here to help lead the conversation tonight. Thank you so much.
Yes, and I think we should add that GSBA is the largest LGBTQ chamber in the nation.
Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you for adding that further clarification. So last but not least, J. Manny Santiago is the inaugural executive director of the Washington State LGBTQ Commission, having been appointed by Governor Jay Inslee to his cabinet in 2019. Originally from the mountains of Puerto Rico, Manny graduated with a degree in sociology from the University of Puerto Rico. Tell me how I pronounce this, Manny. Mayagüez?
Mayagüez, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, Mayagüez campus. He studied theology, obtaining a Master of Divinity at the Andover Newton Theological School in Massachusetts. And I think now they're over at Yale, if I'm not mistaken, and studied public administration at the Pontifical Catholic University of Puerto Rico in Ponce. Manny serves as on various committees and work groups on religion, Latinx identity, sexual and gender identity, and immigrants' rights at the national and international level. He is a senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum, Tacoma, Pierce County, and serves his community as a member of the board of directors of Tacoma Community House, as well as the board of trustees for the Tacoma Art Museum, Tacoma Public Library, and Tacoma Community College. His writings have been featured in several books and professional journals, as well as in the Huffington Post, the Washington Post, and many other national media. In 2022, Manny was one of the recipients of the National Latino Leadership Awards from the Council for Latino Workplace Equity for his work to advance Latino AX leadership in the United States. He currently lives in Tacoma with his husband and enjoys cooking, oil painting, traveling, hiking, and reading works by Latina women writers. Manny, was there anything off in terms of how I introduced you there in terms of pronunciations? I'm concerned for getting it right.
It's Ponce with
Ponce,
yeah,
thank you.
not Ponce. And the other thing that might be of interest to the audience is that I am an ordained American Baptist minister. That was my life before nonprofit and government. So the first openly gay Latino person to be ordained within the American Baptist churches.
Very good. Thank you, Manny. Thanks for the additional note by way of introduction. And it's again, great to have you and all our other panelists here this evening. So we're going to launch right in with the questions. We have a full list of questions. And as Dr. Farlow said, people can post comments or questions. And as time permits in the flow of conversation, I will try and raise those as much as possible to our panelists. So as we get going, I've already introduced what this session is about. To begin, could one or more of you unpack what I read tonight in terms of the summary for our presentation about gay youth when they come out and tell they can easily be kicked out of their homes, Christian homes, they're homeless, that can lead to dangers with suicide, foster care situations, there's overlap. So that's what I had said by way of summary. Specifically, it would help acclimate our viewers and listeners to the issues we're addressing if you could provide more context. And with that, please develop for them what is occurring in Christian homes when LGBTQ plus youth come out and tell their birth parents and what the risks are to them. It would also be helpful if one or more of you could provide more context, as I said, as to what happens in foster care when foster parents and families find out the youth whom they have welcomed into their homes are gay. So I'll leave it to you, whoever would like to start out. And if more, one or more others want to add further content for context, that would be great.
I can jump in since
Please do.
we are working on these issues actually from the government perspective. And recently I met with people from the foster care division of the Department of Children, Youth and Families at the Washington state government. And we were discussing a little bit of this, but real quick, some of the things that we see on our side, right? About 40%, 40 to 44% of all youth experiencing homelessness are or identify as LGBTQ. Now, what is concerning about that number is not just that it's a huge number, a big number, but also that the majority of those youth and children who end up experiencing homelessness, of that 40%, 40 to 44%, is the majority of those youth come from Christian homes that have been parents who have rejected them, who have thrown them out, who have told them, you know, you cannot live here anymore because this is a Christian household. This is, you know, this is what we are. And then usually they throw them out, or the children don't feel safe enough to stay in the home, so they run away. So the most concerning part of this is that most of those youth who are experiencing hopelessness come from families who say that they are Christian families and Christian households. And then the other concern with the other side of this is that most of the families who sign up to be foster care homes are are moved to do so because their faith calls them to do something about the youth who are in foster care. So, but then when the children in foster care go to these homes, they don't necessarily feel safe, or the foster parents don't want to recognize or to respect the child and youth identity, self-identification. So, it's both sides. It is most of the youth who are experiencing homelessness who are LGBTQ come from Christian households, and that's why they end up in the streets. And at the same time, the homes that are seeking to be foster homes, the majority of them come from Christian households as well. And, it's something that we have to reconcile to some extent, and we'll be talking about that later on, but those are some of the statistics that we see. And just the final thing of this is that there's an urgent need right now in the foster care system, at least in Washington. I bet that is the same in other states, but in Washington, there's an urgent need to find foster homes for all the children in foster care home. But unfortunately, the majority of the children that we are having a hard time placing in foster homes are children and youth who identify as LGBTQ. So it's an urgency. It's something that we have to talk about. It's something that we have to address.
Thank you very much, Manny. That was extremely helpful. Others?
Yes, I can add to that just from logistic standpoint. I actually sit on the board of Cocoon House, which is a homeless shelter or actually a homeless organization, but it's really a youth organization that helps those that are homeless. And 51% right here in Everett or Snohomish County is LGBTQ, are LGBTQ homeless teens. And that of scenarios just like Manny had shared, where they had originally had been with families that, or their own families that have a Christian background, and they just didn't know what to do and felt like they had nowhere to go. So they are now being housed or work receiving wraparound services with Cocoon House. But just like Manny said, we also have a foster wing of that where folks can help shelter some of these wonderful youth in their homes, as opposed to in the place that they're in the shelter. And in that case, we have scenarios where folks are choosing to do that, just like Manny said, from a love from a Christian base, but not realizing that they're receiving kids. They're that way. From my perspective, at GSBA, we also have a scholarship fund. And in that scholarship fund are for those that are in the LGBTQ community, or those that have worked closely with the LGBTQ plus community and our allies, can receive scholarships. And we have them tell their impact stories. And I'm telling you, there's not a dry eye in the place, because there are so many stories of abandonment. It's a common theme that goes through every single one of them. And they're just glad to have someone listen to their stories and have someone who's willing to help them, guide them, work with them, and more important, accept and be a part of who they are. And so at GSBA, we think of these scholars, these amazing folks, as part of our family. So we're very protective of them. But it saddens me, because of these are the common stories that are going through this community, and it doesn't have to be.
Thank you very much, Terea. That sense of abandonment, that's very heavy, just as you were even sharing that word, what that entails. Drew and Brad, did you wish to add?
Sure. Yeah, I'd love to chime in. So again, thank you so much for having me. It means a lot for me to be able to take part in this. I've been a fan of New Wineskins, of you, Paul, and you, Dad, and all of the folks, many of whom I hope are watching tonight, who have taken a part through the years of the various initiatives that New Wine has done, many of which I've thought have been really incredibly critical, and critical in the sense of being important, deeply connected to the most critical issues that the church has to wrestle with moving forward into the 21st century. So I'm glad to be here tonight. I'm coming to you guys tonight from like my apartment, right, in Los Angeles. I'm inside right now. I live in this beautiful place with that lovely tall guy who just left, my boyfriend, and I have a lot of stability in my life today. But 2 years ago, that was not the case. 2 years ago, I had been living on the street, often on the street for a solid year, and really kind of in and out of housing, nomadism in my car for several years before that. I was, in particular, during the year of 2020 through 2021, experiencing an intense nadir low point of drug addiction, incapacitating drug addiction, that was part of the reality of why I was really the primary part of the reality of why I was homeless and out on the streets. But one thing, and actually just for that tonight, I wore my best oogle drag tonight. All right. I've got an oogle is somebody who's like who lives on the street with the street kids, maybe hops a train, but like actually has a place to go home to, you know. And so I've got my Carhartts on, I've got my Bando. This is my backpack. This is the backpack that I carried around for years. I got my patches on it. You'll see all kinds of amazing patches with homeless kids and the stuff that they carry around, in particular with queer homeless kids, which, by the way, I really appreciated that figure, Manny, and your figures, Trey, as well. I think that, what was it, 44%? I think that is probably actually even an understatement. I think that there's a self-reporting bias against folks saying that they're part of that community. And I would also go further to say that even those people who aren't necessarily identifying as LGBT, if you're homeless, if you're on the street, you are profoundly connected to LGBT concerns, LGBT issues, LGBT aesthetics, because everybody else around you, there's a massively disproportionate amount of those people who are queer compared to the general population. So it's a queer space. The street is a queer space. And so I come here tonight with really mostly just my own experience. You know, I don't have a lot of the education or a lot of the praxis that I maybe hope to have 10 years from now, 15 years from now. But I come here tonight with the stability of having spent the last year and a half doing nothing but getting sober, and the experiences of having been a queer person on the street who, even like I said, was there for drug addiction. It's impossible to separate the drug addiction narrative that put me on the street from my experience as a gay person growing up in the evangelical culture. And I think that's important to understand.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you very much. And I'm so glad to know how you're sensing more and more stability after so much upheaval. I rejoice with you in that stability, and also always grateful for your brilliance. So Brad.
Yeah, you know, for me, this there's a lot of sides of this journey. Obviously, as the father of a gay son, you know, for 13 years I was a pastor in an evangelical church. And by the way, I've been assured that this place I'm in has great Wi-Fi, but it's been a bit wonky. So hopefully I'll stay on. One of the things, this is a very sad issue for me, and I mean, I've known these statistics for a long time, and these statistics are realities that have been communicated to me one-on-one in person. So for 20 years, I have been receiving emails, phone calls, texts from both parents and kids. Parents who are evangelicals who find themselves in a difficult position because from their understanding of scripture, they disagree with their kids' view of sexuality. And they find themselves wondering, what am I supposed to do about this? The sad and difficult thing is for many of those parents, their response isn't just, I can't accept my child's behavior. It's, I can't accept the way they are. I can't accept who they are. And if they can't stop being the way they are or who they are, they have to leave. Even if they're not living that out, that reality out. It's just because who you are, you can't be in our home anymore. And this is the sad reality of so many young people being on the streets because of their connection to conservative, religious, evangelical Christian family. Obviously, there are many evangelical parents who disagree with their kids, but don't kick them out and want them to stay in their homes and want to work through this. And that's a difficult journey. That's the journey that Drew and I were on for a long time. And so you find these people in a situation of saying, okay, these are my biblical convictions. They are at odds with my child's life behavior. What am I supposed to do about this? And honestly, parents aren't prepared for that in the evangelical church. They're just told, this is what we believe. And if your kids don't believe this, you got to do something about this. And it's created a tragedy.
Thank you, Brad. Sobering to say the least. And we're going to be delving further into this subject. That was to provide context with the initial question. So let's delve deeper into the subject matter. How do evangelical Christians connect their non-affirming theology to the biblical call to care for the hurting, no matter their background? Now, Brad, I think it's maybe a good thing that we start with you. It doesn't only have to be you who answers this, but I think as someone who's wrestled through this yourself and engages people, how might you provide an initial response to that question? How do evangelical Christians, how might they connect their non-affirming theology to the biblical call to care for the hurting, no matter their background? Brad, you're on mute.
This is an issue that we see throughout the scriptures, in the Hebrew scriptures and in the New Testament. In the Hebrew scriptures, it's all the stories about the stranger and the immigrant, and that the people of Israel, they don't believe the same things those people believe about God. Their lifestyles are very different, and yet God says to them, you must welcome these people. Not only must you love them, but Middle Eastern hospitality rules that we see clearly in the scriptures are you must welcome these people into your home. You must care for them. You must meet their needs. This is a clear issue in the Hebrew scriptures. And then Jesus just summarizes this in the New Testament when he tells us that the summary of the law is to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus doesn't tell us we get to choose which neighbors we're talking about here and which neighbors we're going to love. It is all our neighbors, no matter what the color of their skin is, no matter what their sexual preference is, no matter what their gender identity is. These people are to be loved by this, such that we are willing to give ourselves for them. And given those kinds of postures from the scriptures, Old and New Testament, I find it difficult to understand how a Bible-believing person wouldn't go in that direction and be thinking, okay, I disagree with these people, I disagree with their view of sex and perhaps gender and all of that, but my call is to love them, no matter whether they agree with me. So that's just a fundamental issue to me.
Thank you, Brad. And anyone else wish to respond to that question in terms of how might evangelical Christians connect between their non-affirming theology and the biblical call to care for the hurting, regardless of the background?
I don't know that I necessarily have an answer to this in a way that's. What I'm thinking about is context and historical context in terms of reasons why a conservative Christian young person who is not like an adult age living in a conservative Christian home like might be thrown out. And I'm thinking about like where has that been along like the trajectory of American history in the last 50, 100, 150 years. And one of the things that I think about is like because I hear this and Dad, in what you were saying about, I may disagree with my child's view or my child's, understanding of themselves, their gender, their sexuality. And I think that one of the things we're going to have to address as we get into other questions about logistics of parents, logistics of youth pastors, et cetera, is that within evangelical culture and conservative Christian culture in America, which has been traditionally and still to this day is very much a culture highly concerned with purity, highly concerned with ideas of infection, almost like an infection model of sin, right? That if you have someone who is become impure, that they could, really affect the rest of the community. That often before the gay rights revolution and before queer people were given the social power politically to be able to come out of the closet, because I often hear like Christian parents and see it online that talking about like, well, this is a fad and there's so many more gay people and trans kids now than there ever were before. It's because they're seeing it on television. Well, my understanding of that is like, no, these gender varieties and sexual identities were always present within the human population. They're just now being able to come out and express themselves without fear of violence. To the degree that there was fear of violence and social approbation before. There is still fear of violence now, social approbation, but now it's less. And yes, them seeing other people like us on TV and in culture allows us the freedom to come out. But I'm thinking about, like, for example, before the gay rights revolution, really probably the brunt of this kind of purity extremism around the body, et cetera, was borne by women and people, female people, people with wombs who, like, if a girl went out and got herself knocked up, if a girl went out and got herself pregnant, or if a girl went out and found, it became known within the community that she had broken her, chastity or her virginity, she might be thrown out of her house, right? Thrown out by her family. But then I'm also thinking about the fact that, like, for example, even in my own family, like when my aunt became pregnant outside of marriage when she was a teenager, my evangelical pastor grandfather kept her in their home and cared for her. And while still the pastor of his evangelical community, he stood by his daughter, right? And during the whole experience of her pregnancy and her giving this up for adoption, this child, that's it to me. And he just passed this year, so I've been thinking about him a lot lately. And like, that was incredible Christ-like behavior. And I think that now where we are historically, post the Reagan moment, post the moral majority moment, post the 1990s culture war and the, James Dobson disciplinarian, control your children kind of cultural messaging, we have parents who, in the face of a growing visibility of their queer kids, it's not that there weren't queer kids before, but in the face of a growing visibility, they are reacting in extreme ways that I think would even beggar the, and shame and be embarrassing to, evangelical Christian parents of previous generations who would not maybe have treated, an errant daughter in that way. So I think it's important that we understand the cultural context that we're in, and the fact that since the 80s and the 90s and the reaction against the gay movement and the extremism of cultural leaders like James Dobson, cultural leaders like, the leaders of the moral majority, these Christian folks have grown up in an environment where they feel they have to be relentless and unforgiving and pure in their response to their children. And so, I know that was kind of meandering and I hope it was helpful, but I think that we're going to have to deal with parents and youth group leaders who are looking at kids who identify in this way. And then when kids start to act in a way that feels sinful or outside of the family's boundaries. And those are two related but different things.
So what I hear you talking about is the historical, cultural context, both past and present. And your dad was talking about the biblical context, both Old and New Testaments. Let's move further into some of the other questions. It's not to say we can't come back to this one, but I'd really like to delve further, and then hopefully Manny and Terea could then take up the next question to start out with, and that is, how do we get to the common denominator? We're really wrestling through that language of what to come up with. Common denominator is what we settled on. How do we get to the common denominator of human dignity and decency, including its bearing on persons and policies pertaining to the LGBTQ plus community. And with that, we all were thinking about this parable and related themes of, consider here, please, Jesus' parable of the Samaritan of extraordinary mercy, or Good Samaritan story in Luke 10, and America's fundamental values, as well as the commandment of love thy neighbor. And I know, Manny, you're an American Baptist minister, you're ordained as an American Baptist minister. And Treya, you also have a Christian story. So feel free to initiate this discussion for us at this juncture, Manny and Treya.
Yes, I can speak to this, and actually to tie it to what we were talking about, I
Sure.
think that Drew actually mentioned something that is for me very important to keep in mind, which is the context of purity and what Christianity in general, in all its expressions, have considered pure and what is not pure, and the relationship between what purity means and my personal and my communal relationship with the divine, right, and with each other, and I would take it from there. So a couple of things that I can think of is that it's interesting to me, and I have to say this, right, that the American Baptist churches are a mainline Protestant denomination, and I'm also Latino. So although denominationally, the theology of the denomination might not be same as evangelical Christianity within the United States, we do have some expression of that within the American Baptist churches, but it wasn't, theologically, it wasn't what affected my parents, for instance, reaction to my coming out. It was more social, right? So social and cultural, because, well, I'm Latino. I grew up in Puerto Rico. Both the Catholic Church and the many Pentecostal and charismatic movements influenced mainline Protestantism in Puerto Rico, still do. So from that perspective, one of the things that is interesting to me that I think that we need to talk about is consistency of belief and practice. And by that I mean, within the evangelical theology, the importance, and this actually you inherited from the Baptist, you believe that the relationship is personal between the human person, the individual, and God, right? And that individualism in salvation and purity is key to many aspects of Christianity, especially more conservative evangelical Christianity. And there's not always, but oftentimes there's a criticism to the social communal aspect of theological salvation, or salvation from a theological perspective, that many other denominations, like most mainline denominations and Catholicism and Orthodoxy, have to salvation, right? It's not just personal, it's also communal. But then the interesting thing is that once that a person commits a sin, according to the church, whatever the church teaches a sin is, then the communal becomes something, right? Becomes the problem. So I believe that my relationship with God is the key to my salvation, and I have the responsibility to teach you. And I'm talking about, the logic, what I read as the logic of a Christian evangelical person, right? Because my relationship with God is personal, it is my relationship. Nobody's going to mess up with that. It's mine. And I have a responsibility to teach others that is their personal responsibility to have a relationship with God. Okay. But then once that someone comes out in my household, then it becomes communal. It's like, no, if you stay here, and I'm talking from experience, this is what my parents told me when they kicked me out of the house, right? When I came out in 97. If I stayed there, then I am staining their relationship to God. But there's some inconsistency there, right? How is it that you believe that your relationship with God is unique, it's personal, it should be personal, you have the responsibility to share with others what you believe that relationship should be, but not to impose it on others? You're inviting others, you're supposed to invite others to come and have that same relationship, but you're not supposed to impose that. But then once that it becomes quote unquote a problem of sin, then it becomes communal. Like I am tainting you. But for me, that's a little bit inconsistent, right? Now, I know that it comes, or I assume that it comes from the fear of not understanding and not wanting to go deeper to understand, because it might challenge what your positions are. And honestly, I believe that Brad is going to agree with me here. Most parish ministers who have the responsibility of preaching, we haven't done a good job in in actually talking about these difficult issues and what to do if our faith is challenged and how to navigate that, right? It's not something that we have been good at doing. And I'm talking, you know, from when I was in the pulpit, right? Because I did that too. Like it was all about the relationship with Christ, but it wasn't about, oh, these challenging things, this is how you navigate that. So for me, you know, going back to the question and all these stream of things, I think that there's some inconsistency when we want to impose on somebody else what we believe, because if I believe that my personal relationship with God is personal, is individual, why do I have to care so much about how the other person is going to affect my personal relationship with God? And it shouldn't be an issue. It should be a conversation. Sure, I might not agree with you. I might not get to there, to the place that you wish I was. But the same is, I mean, it's the same, you know, the reverse is also the same. Like I will not get to that place either. But we can have a conversation and we can have respect and say, hey, you know, I don't agree. I don't need to understand everything, but because my personal relationship with God is my personal relationship, I am not going to act on something that is outside of those parameters. Now, if the understanding is communal, then there's a different perspective, right? Like, how can we as a community care for each other regardless of our differences, especially because we are part of a system, a family in this case, where everybody should have an opportunity to feel loved, to feel respected, to feel empowered, to grow healthy and safe. So, yeah.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you. And we'll return to that theme in a little while about personal relationship and then imposition of the personal on others communally. Shouldn't we be consistent personal to personal or communal to communal rather than making the switch, is what I hear you saying in midstream. So anyone else want to respond to this issue that we initiated by talking about the common denominator? How do we get to the common denominator of human dignity and decency, including its bearing on persons and policies pertaining to the LGBTQ plus community? Treya, do you want to respond at this point?
Yes, in regards to the common denominator, and I will be transparent and say upfront that I am considered an ally in the community, and actually I call myself an advocate, really, because I'm willing to go out there and fall over a cliff, which basically says that I am not LGBTQ plus, but I understand and support equality in this way. The common denominator that comes to mind for me, and has always been in my life, is love. That's the common denominator. We come into our, as Manny says, you come into your relationship with the Lord and God in different ways, and how you do that is, I would concur, is individual. It's individual and special to you. But where God talks to me and where Jesus talks to me is to my heart. When I hear the voice, I'm hearing it from the heart. And so when I am touched by someone, in this case, as we talk about suicide and as we talk about homelessness, it's because that person no longer is feeling loved, right? They're no longer feeling value as a human on this earth. That to me is not what God intended, is not why we are, or why I'm a Christian, that is not my space, is to walk in the world and not provide love, right? And so there's a lot of intersectionality that happens between the LGBTQ community, as well as being a Black person. There's a lot of intersectionality. I can relate to some of the things that they're going through because of experiences that I've gone through as an individual in this world. And at the basis of that was a factor of folks not loving who I am as an individual. So I can say that the common denominator without any um, reservation to me is we have to love our neighbor. We have to love them as God asked us to love ourselves. What folks do in their household um, and what they choose to do with each other is their business. And I'm not in the process of judging. That's not what my life is here for. I leave that to the Lord to do. My abilities, because there's things that I do that somebody may not agree with. And I'm not asking for them to agree with it. I'm not asking them to be me. I'm an individual walking in this world. I'm asking them to accept and love me for how I want to represent myself in the world. And so because I'm asking that of others, I feel that I need to do that for others as well.
Thank you, Treya.
That's a great
Yeah,
question.
Drew, you wanted to follow up to Treya?
Yeah, so Treya, I love what you're saying, and like also thank you, ally. But so okay, so I love what you're saying, and yet I'm thinking the whole time as you're talking about this, isn't the sort of framework of subject to subject consciousness, I am going to do me, you're going to do you, we're going to respect each other as individual, discrete, human, citizens of the world. And we're going to agree to certain kinds of, rules of the game in public space in terms of civility, et cetera. Isn't that different from one of the stickier things that we have in this situation, which is a question of intra-household authority, right? Like, don't we have a situation of like, whether it's parents and their biological children or parents and their foster children and adopted children, we have a situation of parents, evangelical Christian parents, feeling that they are charged with this holy charge to bring up their child in the way they should go, and that there will be certain rules that are maintained within that house as long as they are given that sacred responsibility, which includes a kind of like authoritarian power over their children's bodies, how their children live in the world, how they dress in the world, who they see in the world, if they, have sexual intimacy with other people in the world. Also, like, and in particular, I think having to do with like gender and gender expression, like, parents and conservative parents have been freaking out about what their kids were wearing, forever, right? But like here we have a situation where because of this gender divergence, gender diversity, visibility revolution, you have kids who are saying, no, I identify with this sort of like non-traditional, non-het, non-cis gender expression, and I'm going to dress like this. And parents are, and again, I think this goes back to what you were saying, Manny, about the particular obsession with purity and staining of the house within evangelical and, Baptist, mainline, conservative Protestant culture in America. Parents are freaking out because they think, well, not only is this child now presenting themselves in a way on their body, which is my responsibility till they're 18, in a way that like I don't agree with, it's a way that reflects sinfully on themselves, on us, and it's my responsibility as a parent to put a stop to that. I mean, am I wrong that that's the mentality that we're dealing with?
Oh, you're not wrong in the mentality, but I have such a reverent issue with that
Right.
because God created each and every one of us in his own image, and we're all individuals, and we're coming to the world to bring our individuality to make a whole. Right.
Yes.
And so if I go in and say, okay, Drew, I want you to be the carbon copy of me, right? I want you to walk, talk, be, act, smell, stand, sit, do everything that I'm doing, then I'm literally taking the individuality out of you. Right. I'm making you the carbon copy of me. And that's not why we were born. Because if we were, we'd all look the same. And we don't. I mean, even identical twins have at least one thing that might be different with them. There's a reason for that. And so we, as parents or as ones that are rearing our children, we need to understand they are individuals. We need to dive into them and what they are cast to do here in the world.
And I
right?
would say that that kind of understanding of individuality is more consistent with the American indigenous cultures. It's more consistent with like many different cultures that have that focus on individuality with their kids. But the dominant heteronormative Christian white culture of America has, I would argue, rejected that throughout most of American history in terms of saying like, no, you are to follow these particular, you're going to do this, you're going to go to this school, you're going to, you know,
And look where we're at today.
Exactly. And I would say that this is different also. There's a real difference at different levels of class. I would say that this is a middle class mentality and an aspirationally middle class and upper class mentality. I think when you see on the edges of the American class sphere, which include a lot of people of like non-white, people who are outside of the American system of entitlements, right? I would say that there is a in my observation, more of a acceptance of individuality, at least within certain confines of like inside the house. Like, and I wonder if like, for example, like I wonder what this is like in the public-private sort of like dynamic in Black American conservative churches and experiences versus white American conservative churches and experiences, and versus Latino American churches and experiences. And so like, yeah, I don't know. That's
I
what
mean,
with this.
let's be clear. This is a common thing throughout, regardless of what ethnicity you're in, right? There are folks that, you know, from all walks and talks and backgrounds and ethnicity that are not keeping their children in their home or causing them to leave. It is not a racial thing, right? It is definitely something that is a common thing. But the thing that I, like you were mentioning, is that I think that we need to start thinking about this differently. And we also have to act differently, because what we have done in the past is just not working. It's just not working. And the
So
thing
let
that
me,
has been consistently working is when we think about folks in the mindset of love.
Adria, Brad?
yeah, so, you know, as the parent of a gay son and as an evangelical Christian, I will say that as a parent, I felt that it was my responsibility to guide my kids, all of my kids, and that, of course, part of guiding them was going to be connecting them with my convictions from Scripture, which I thought were not only right but best for them. And so my motivation wasn't to squelch my kids' individuality, but was to say, I think this is God's path for you. I think this is the best path. Now, I will also say that because I believe in getting back to the dignity issue, that all my children and my son is created in the image of God. He has ultimate dignity and is ultimately going to make his own decisions, and that I may disagree with those decisions. I may not disagree with those decisions. But I feel like I have a responsibility to share my convictions with my son and with my kids. But when Drew came out, so did I. And I came out at my conservative Christian university and said, I am the father of a gay son. He's beautiful because he's created in the image of God. I love him. We disagree about issues of sexuality, but I'm going to continue to embrace my son and love him. And we're going to walk through this issue as father and son together. I think, you know, that evangelical parents are going to feel, and I think lots of parents that, whether they're Christians or not, feel they have a responsibility to guide and shape their kids. And that's legitimate. There just comes a time when parents have to understand, you know, ultimately my kids are going to go their own way. Sometimes they'll go the way I think they should go. Sometimes they're not. And my job is to continue to love them because they're beautiful. They're made in the image of God.
That's exactly what I'm saying. I did not want it to be construed that you should not guide your children. Of course, you want to do that, but just like you said, Brad, you said it perfectly. When they get to the point where they are being an individual, you need to understand where what your child is trying to tell you is their individual process. And that's when that's the hardest decision, is to stand back and say, okay, this is how I'm going to work with you in love. And, and also I get a little bit of what Drew is saying. There's also a protection, right? You want to make sure that they don't get hurt, or that, they're not, that they have the best foot forward. And that's what you're doing. But you don't want to lead in fear either. You want to be there, and you want to be, you don't want your reaction to be a reaction that takes away the love that you had for them coming into the world in the first place.
So thank you, Trey and Brad and Manny and Drew. Excellent reflections. I knew we were going to face this tonight because we only have about a half hour and we have a long way to go. And it's not that I want to get fixated on time, but we do drop the program right at 8:30. So I want to get into the foster care situation here. We didn't have a question specifically about that. The next question on the docket is about youth pastors and how can we help youth pastors. But so we have, let's say, biological and adopted children that are, our children. And we have that sense of responsibility, what Brad and Trey were talking about. We have a responsibility. No doubt, Manny, your parents felt a responsibility, right? And so that's just something that a parent does. And there is this desire to affirm their children. They love their children, and they have this sense of they're created in the image of God, as Brad said, have this inherent worth and dignity. Okay, now we have foster children, right? And there's this passion amongst evangelicals to, like, we need to make sure that they have a place too. God loves them. They have inherent dignity and worth. And they're brought into our homes. And I don't know where this goes at this point, what the tensions might be when they bring someone in. They didn't raise this child from the earliest days. Manny, you're working a lot in that domain, right? And I know, Brad, you said you've interacted a lot with foster, no doubt, Terea and Drew as well. But Manny, just today you were talking with parents working in the foster care situation. How do you account for this, like, responsibility? They're in my home. I want to help them. I want to shepherd them, so to speak. They have their individuality. They're not even my birth child, but I care about them. How do you bring decency and dignity and responsibility to affirm them, even with their and in their individuality? What does that look like, Manny?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that is so important because the urgency for foster care, for safe foster care homes for all youth and children in foster care, it's great. It's huge. So a couple of things that I would suggest, right, from my perspective, working in these systems, is that there are materials, there are things, tools that the state, in our case, the state provides for families to navigate these situations. And they are not that different than, when foster care parents are being trained and introduced to the challenges of fostering for a child with disabilities. Every child is different. Every child has a different need, has a different understanding of themselves, of the systems that they have to navigate. Every child processes these traumas differently, and they're going to act differently and react to that trauma in different ways, right? So one of the things that happens is that it is the responsibility of the state, in our case, to provide the tools for the families. Unfortunately, right now at the federal level, there are some restrictions, some laws and regulations that allow any foster care parent to forego some of these trainings, specifically the ones that are related to LGBTQ identity and how to work with foster kids who are LGBTQ. So unfortunately, that already exists. It was implemented in the last administration. The current administration hasn't rescinded them, so they continue there. So what we face is that many of these parents, foster care parents and households, do not want to take the trainings, do not want to go through the process, because they understand that by bringing an LGBTQ kid to their home, their life, their afterlife is compromised. The idea for many of them is that they can use this opportunity of fostering a kid as a way of evangelizing and Christianizing this kid, without realizing that the kid might have come from an exactly the same situation at their home, and that's why they're homeless, right? So I think that what my invitation would be to recognize that the tools are there, that just because you have the chance and the opportunity to not take them because they might disagree with your theology and your morals, that shouldn't be an excuse to be competent on how to provide care for a whole section of the population that desperately needs stability in their homes. So that's the first thing. The second thing that I want to address is that when you're a foster care household, it is not, or it should not be with the intention of converting that kid to a replica, as Soraya said, a replica and a carbon copy of who you are and who your family is, right? So think about the many kids who practice any type of religion, Christianity of any other type of religion, who end up in the foster care system for a bunch of different reasons. And can you imagine if that kid asks their foster care parents, who might be atheist, and that foster kid asks that family, can I go to church? Can I go to mosque? Can I go to temple? And the foster family says, no, because I'm an atheist. And you might be a Christian, but I'm not. So I'm not going to take you to your, place of congregation with your faith. It's the same thing for an LGBTQ child who is in foster care, right? I'm not asking you to offer your house as an opportunity to convert that kid to whatever your morals are. You can share certainly with them. If the rule is that you sit down at the table at 7 to have your dinner and you say grace, that's the rule of the house. But please, do not impose your beliefs on that kid. First of all, because they're going to be there temporarily. Second, because it should not be an extension of your evangelism as a way of conversion, to have that kid who had already been traumatized and then having this other, this other experience of trauma because they don't know how to navigate that and they don't know how to push back on what is being imposed on them. And third, recognize that the kid is their own kid. They're going to react in different ways. And the tools are there from the agencies that provide the tools and provide the system of foster care and all that. The tools are there for you to understand how to approach it. That doesn't mean that you have to accept, that you personally have to accept what the training says. It only helps you in navigating the situation and understanding what the kid is experiencing. And you can have the conversation with them. You can share what your values are, but understand that they come with a different understanding of their own selves, their own systems, and they have probably already experienced those conversations with their parents. And that's probably why they're there on the first place, right? So make sure that you are exposed to those tools. And if you have concerns, if you have challenges, if you feel challenged, discuss that with somebody else, not with the system. The system is trying to keep the children safe, understanding that we serve all kids regardless of their background. And the foster care home should be the same place, right? A place where the child has some stability until the situation is solved. It is not, or it should not be, the playground of proselytism for people who want to add numbers to their records or whatever it is, because sometimes it feels like that, and it shouldn't be. It should be a place that is safe for that kid to transition into something more permanent, and the tools are there for you to understand how to navigate that.
Thank you, Manny. We're going to turn in a few minutes to the conversation with youth pastors, right? That was something that we wanted to engage. We'll come to that. Any other thoughts related to what Manny helpfully shared just now? Yep.
Okay, so I love that. I'm thinking about the history of mainline Christianity in the United States. And I think about the different instances in our history where certain issues of human dignity and authority human dignity and the status quo have divided the church in major ways that the church felt reverberations from for years to come. I think about abolitionism. I think about the Scopes monkey trial and evolution, science in the progressive era. I think about the civil rights movement. I think about Vietnam, right? And to me, what I see happening right now is another watershed issue with the youth revolution of visibility of queer identities within the American sort of Christian tapestry that is acting like those other moments did as a kind of a sieve and is separating certain kinds of Christians and Christian communities from others. And it falls along a spectrum. It's not a binary, but one of the things that I see is a reaction among a lot of American Christians of clinging to this authoritarianism that has to do with control, and then other Christians saying, no, that's not actually what my Christianity is about. My Christianity is about love, is about my relationship with Jesus, is about my caring for the disadvantaged, right? And that separation, that sieving is happening right now at a huge level across our country and in our communities. And so on the one hand, when I hear about like this foster kid situation, it doesn't surprise me that a lot of, that this is coming up in a really like difficult way with Christian families who want to foster a kid, and then have this issue of them being LGBT and they're struggling with that. It doesn't surprise me for two reasons. One, evangelicals are in so many ways, by and large, the most big-hearted, sincerely big-hearted people that I have ever known. I think that is true about the evangelical community. I see that reflected in my experience of the Christian community, having grown up in it. There are people in a culture who really genuinely care about the suffering person. But then also what's true about the evangelical community is that it's a community that really cares about proselytizing and getting souls for God, and a kind of colonial impulse to get people that way. And you see this, for example, in the difference between how Christians in America responded to AIDS when it was here in the United States, and it was gay people and Black people and people using IV drugs, and that the response was like, no funding, no, don't help them. These people are bad people who are already lost and we don't need to worry about them, versus how that transformed over the next 20 years to the immense amount of generosity fiscally to people who were suffering from AIDS in Africa. And once these bodies who were seen as potential new recruits, people who we could evangelize and bring into the Christian fold and give missions to, once they were constructed within the narrative as somebody who was suffering from AIDS, then Christians in America opened their hearts and opened their wallets and sent, millions of dollars to these initiatives to go and do AIDS relief in African countries. The same people who wouldn't do it here in the United States when it was gay people. So there's this sort of duality, this double-faced, duality. And for me, the parents who are caring about having a foster kid in their home because they want to save that kid, I'm not interested in thinking about them, because like I don't think that there's a lot we can do to help that situation. But there are a lot of Christians, and I would hope to say the majority of American evangelical Christians, who care genuinely and deeply about wanting to do the work of the Good Samaritan, about wanting to do the work of Jesus, who said, feed my people, visit them when they're in jail, give them clothes when they're naked. Like, that is a real reality. And if we can, again, coming back to this question of baseline dignity, if we can create a culture that says to, whether it's foster parents who want to take those kids in or youth pastors who want to minister to them, that you need to recognize the dignity of the human being, meet their basic needs first, and really focus on that, which is what Jesus talked about. And then also, and here's the key, I think, those people can work with members of the community, people who are counselors, youth counselors at the local LGBT center, people who are trained to have dialogue, and they can work within their communities, pastors, social workers, to have conversations, to build a team around helping these kids. And I think that's critical, because we're not asking these parents to change their beliefs, but we are asking them to form a bigger team of dialogue not just within their own insular evangelical community, but people like Torea, people who want to act as advocates for these kids and who are willing to have a conversation with conservative parents about how to do that in a way that maintains their integrity.
So let's transition here at this point to the next question. I think it follows. You're talking about expanding, and it might be for youth pastors too, to expand their networks. You said it's beyond just the evangelical community. You said there are these resources, Manny, out there for foster care parents. What about for youth pastors? So the question that we all agreed upon to engage was, how do youth pastors engage with caring for LGBTQ plus youth in their youth groups? What policies and programs need to be developed to assist them? You know, maybe it shouldn't just be staying within the Christian community to engage in building those resources, as Drew was saying. We need to expand the networks. So what would you recommend, those of you in this call, what would you recommend in terms of what youth pastors can be doing as they have gay youth, LGBTQ plus youth in their youth groups? What policies and programs can be developed to help them?
Well, I'll just mention a few things. First of all, in some ways, the evangelical community is handicapped in dealing with this, because essentially what they've said is, look, this is our view, we're not going to change it, get over it. And there's really no way to go from there. I mean, helping a gay kid in a youth group is like, what do you mean help a gay kid? We don't believe in kids being gay. We don't, you know, we're not going to do anything about this. So youth pastors are going to have to get over and get beyond just, hey, this is our view. We've got to move beyond and say, okay, that may be my view, but I've got kids here who don't have that view, who are seeing things differently. There needs to be some training too for youth pastors to help them understand these realities. I mean, just simple things like, you know, this person, this LGBTQ plus person didn't just choose this. It's not just a choice. You know, this is something that they experience in the same way that you've experienced every process of relationship and sexuality in your own life. You know, this isn't something they're trying to do. They're not just trying to sin. I mean, so there are thousands of gay youth and youth groups across this country that are praying and praying and praying and praying, saying, dear God, please make me straight. You know, this isn't an issue of them wanting to do this. That youth pastors need to understand that these are people who are experiencing pain and fear, and that's where they need to meet them, and with love in the place of their pain and fear. There's books they need to read, written by Christian people, books like Preston Sprinkle's People to Be Loved, you know, where he says, look, I don't agree with this, but man, we've got a job to do. We've been failing miserably in loving LGBTQ youth, especially in the church. And youth pastors then also need to read something like Karen Keene's book, Scripture, Ethics, and the Possibility of Same-Sex Relationship. This is a self-identified evangelical who's a biblical scholar who is affirming, and she takes a different view on this. And the issue isn't even to read that so that you'll change your biblical view, but so that you can read something from someone who clearly loves Jesus, who clearly loves and respects the Bible, but ends up having a different view than you do, and that's actually a possibility. Because until you realize that that's a possibility, it's very difficult to treat these youth as something other than, I've got to change you, right? And so those are just a few of what the things I would say about how youth pastors need some training in our country.
Can I just say I love my dad so much?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
You know, I agree with you, Brad, in that regard. And I was just like, right when you said, I'm like, thank you for saying that. They don't choose. Folks do not choose. And you know, and I was just thinking about, so my husband and I are in an interracial relationship. And up until 1965, we weren't allowed to be married. Okay, that's not that far ago, you know, and that since changed, right? We have to think about the fact that, let's just take, I mean, this is what became the epiphany in my mind. You have a person who is Black. They have challenges beyond challenges becoming in the world. And then that person decides, or at that point comes out and says, I'm trans. Why would someone do that? Why would someone who's Black take on being trans if they had a choice in the matter, right? So it is a part of who they are. And if you think of something that is, you know, I love the Lord, and I would be challenged if someone came to me and said, "You can't love the Lord." That's part of my DNA. That's a part of who I am, right? I I, I am expressing myself in this realm with everyone. I would be hurt if someone said, "You cannot have your voice be heard," or "You are insignificant." And a lot of, like I said, intersectionality, that was a part of my life at one point. These folks need love. These folks need to be able to feel belong, and that they are a human, and that they count, and that they matter. And so these youth pastors could do such great justice by being an ear and a loving source for these individuals that come to them because they are hurting. They already know it's an uphill battle to even have these conversations with the people that supposedly care for them more than anybody else in this world. And they can't go to them. Who do they have? And sometimes all they have is their youth pastor, because they're like, I got to come to somebody. And so if they can go to that youth pastor, and that youth pastor can be open, just open to hear, even open to say, okay, let me get you to someone who could help you, have these conversations, who can work and have conversations with your parents. And to say, you belong, we understand, you matter, you're a human in this world, we love you just like I love myself. Let me help you as if I would want someone to help me, if I had something in this world that wasn't accepted for whatever the reason.
I have a quick answer to this. In terms of programs and things like that, I don't feel like it would be good for evangelical churches and youth groups to have a specific program for youth, mostly because as a survivor of conversion therapy, that's the vision, that's the way that most of these special programs for LGBTQ youth go. And that would not be healthy. It's actually, it's been proven and by research that that type of approach to sexuality and sexual orientation and gender identity actually increases the suicidal thoughts and actions of people. So I would not recommend, you know, to try to come up with something cool and nice and hip and whatever, because that's usually what we do in church, right? I wouldn't recommend that. What I would recommend and what I would challenge people to think about is reach out to the LGBTQ groups in your area, if you have some, and humbly ask them to help you figure things out. That doesn't mean change your views. It means be exposed to things that you have not been exposed for a myriad of reasons. Try to learn that so you know how to navigate, how to minister with gay youth, right? And remember that we're not ministering to people, we're ministering with people, right? And try to be bold enough, brave enough to be exposed to things that are completely different than the realities that you have experienced in your life. It doesn't mean accept them. It means have the tools to understand when these kids come to you, when these youth come to you, so you know the language, you know how to accompany them, and make sure that you understand that the final decision on where they want to be as humans, as Christians, if they're Christians, as individuals, it's up to them. It is your role to be there for them as a youth pastor. It is your role to be there with them, guiding them, just similar to a parent, but it's not your role to make a decision for them. It's your role to expose them to things, but it's also our role to be exposed to things that are different than ours, than us. So do your research, go to these LGBTQ youth groups, learn from them and learn with them, and then you will have some of the tools to navigate that, and the youth themselves will make the decision at the end whether or not they want to continue with you or they want to take another path. And that shouldn't be a big issue for you, because at the end of the day, every person is responsible for their own salvation, as they say, right? So yeah.
Thank you, Manny. We're coming to the close of our time. And, you know, Brad, I know in your book, Space at the Table with Drew, you talk about, I don't know if this is your language, but there is a sense in which we all have to negotiate public space or space with people, you know, like space at the table, how to negotiate space. And, you know, with my own children, both of whom are heterosexual, but no matter what the issue or issues with them growing up, I had to learn to become more dialogical with my children. The yes, no questions that I started out with, you know, once they got a little bit older, teenage years, things had to get more complex. That with conflict resolution, they had to be much more dialogical. And I think if we want to have relationships with our children, if we want to have relationships with our neighbors, we can't enforce things, otherwise we'll lose the relationships. You know, so I think for evangelicals to want people to have personal relationship with Christ, I think hopefully we want them to have personal relationship with us. How can we be good influences, salt and light of decency and dignity if we're not in the relationship to begin with, if we've lost the relationship? So how to keep the conversation going? And Manny, you're talking about going with them, not to them, going with them and gain resources with them. Be a safe person. So Brad, you talk about this, and I think this is what everyone is about on this conversation, to be with people, not to people. Brad, any thoughts on that from Space at the Table and your own negotiating with Drew? I mean, that's my language. I don't know if you ever used that, but you had to negotiate space. And I just wonder what you would say to that.
Well, I'm sure Drew will remember that we actually wrote another half of the book that never got published because the publisher said it was too long. And we really spent a lot of time writing kind of a guide for parents, you know, about how to do this kind of negotiation. And Drew did such a great job of working with me on that because, you know, we talked about the fact that, you know, when kids are little, parents do have more black and white realities for them because they just need to for their safety. But as kids get older and older, they need to move more and more into a negotiation phase. And especially as kids start approaching adulthood, parents need to start, you know, freeing things up and moving to a more dialogical place about this. And yeah, I mean, there's tons of stuff about that. I took a lot of what Drew and I talked about and put it in an article on Preston Sprinkle's Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender on the web, and just kind of some advice for parents. So a lot of what Drew and I talked about is there. So I won't get into it here, but it, you know, it just has to be progressive, that you move to a more and more mature place of dialogue.
Well, we have just a few minutes. Each person, Terea, if we could start with you, a closing thought. And we're going to have, and then Manny, Drew, and Brad, however you wish to go in order, but we'll start with Terea, a minute or so each. And there'll be opportunity for us to take this further somehow. I don't know how we'll do it, but we will. And the people here on this call are all great resources for people. I mean, so I know that they're in favor of you engaging them somehow, some way on this. I'm speaking to the viewers. But Terea, we'll start with you. Just a closing thought that you'd wish to share with viewers, whether it's a resource or just a final aha or something impressed upon you, and then our other colleagues here as panelists.
Thank you, Paul. And you know, my final thoughts are this. You know, I think that, as I had mentioned before, and I think again, a common thing that has happened around the panel today, and gosh, I just love all of y'all, is love. And we really just need to think out of love, or in love rather, as we navigate the world that's being provided to us, and come open and recognize that everyone is trying to be belong. You know, everyone's trying to be accepted, including yourself. So try to open up that world for them as well, and just be present, and as Manny says, walk with them into that next space. So I want to thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this panel and share these voices and the many conversations that we've had leading up to this. Drew, I just love the way your mind thinks. I could sit here and have coffee with you for days. So thank you, and I will pass the baton to Drew.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Treya.
Treya.
It's an
Yeah.
honor to share space with all of you guys today. I want to express gratitude for being here, sober and in my recovery here in the United States of America, a project that I find deeply flawed, and yet I still have such a hope for here on Tongva land in beautiful California, in so-called Los Angeles. There's so much richness in the thousands of years of human beings on this land. Indigenous people and colonizers and people who were enslaved, and all different kinds of folks bringing the richness of their experience, struggling with what it means to be human. We have such an unbelievably rich resource of our own humanity to draw from within each of us and collective as a community. I've started identifying a lot more as an evangelical over the last several years for a variety of reasons, but mostly just because I think the way you're raised is what sticks with you. And as I think about this issue of queer homeless youth, I see such an unbelievable opportunity for the church, for Christ's church, if people are willing to really hear it and hear the call, and to remember this simple thing that I heard all the time growing up, and I hear all the time in Christian culture. It's a cliche at this point, but I think we have to hear it and really hear it, which is that Jesus didn't talk to people about their sin very much, if at all. Jesus talked to the leaders of the most righteous and the people with the most power who were looking at everybody else and telling them how to live. And he condemned them. But to the people who were suffering, to the people who were homeless, to the people who were naked, to the people who were hungry, he just offered himself. And I think if we want to be Christ-like, that's what we got to do for queer kids.
Thank you very much, Drew and Treya. Manny and then Brad, 1 minute each, please.
Real quick, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. Since I'm in government, I do mostly like bureaucratic stuff. So it's very seldom that I get to do like more theological work, which I write theology, but this type of things it doesn't come by that often. So thank you for that. The other thing is that I did mention part of my history and part of what my family did and how they reacted. I want to close with this. They continue going to church, slightly different church, but they continue going to church. They continue being a faithful Christian, and they are supportive of me, my husband. They actually are coming in August to visit us. My in-laws, who are from Mexico, are also coming in a week to visit. And the truth is that, they have gone through these processes, they have gone through their own journeys, and we all have come together as families, these two families. And now we feel supported. We feel like we have a healthy relationship with everybody within our families. And that is sign that it is possible to hold on to your faith and be, in communion with people that you don't necessarily understand all that, and still be one family, one unit. So that's where we are right now, and I'm thrilled that that's a reality. It didn't happen overnight. It took time. So take your time, because the journey is long. You're gonna get there.
Yeah, word of hope. Thank you. We have about 30 seconds, Brad. Thank you, Manny.
Yeah, I'll just say that the mission of the church is not to change people. The mission of the church is to point people to Jesus. And if people need to be changed, then we need to just trust Jesus and allow him, as he knows people, to draw them in the direction that he's going to draw them. Our job is to point them to Jesus and to love them.
Well, thank you, Brad. Thank you to each of our panelists for excellent reflections, really helping us delve into this. We'll try and make available resources to people that our panelists will share. Someone had asked about that. We'd really love to see resources from this group. So if you can get that to us, that would be really helpful. I want to thank all of those who've attended, who've participated in this in one way or another. Thank you for joining us and for your concern to go deeper into this issue, to really affirm people in their dignity and to love as Jesus loves, and to go deeper as we seek to build these relational bridges and to maximize people's identity and worth, not to marginalize them. Thank you so much for joining us. God's blessings to all of you, and good night.